Hey guys, tonight we journey back to a place with golden gods, cursed tombs and eyeliner that could survive a sandstorm. But don't be fooled by the pyramids or the perfume-soaked hieroglyphs, because being alive in ancient Egypt, it kind of sucked. So before you get comfortable, make sure to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I always love knowing who else is lying in bed at 2 a.m, wondering if they'd survive being reincarnated as a brickmaker for Pharaoh Snefru. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's drift into a story you'll feel grateful to sleep through. Let's be clear. No one in ancient Egypt said, "You know what sounds great? Living next to a crocodile-infested river, sleeping in a mud brick oven with no airflow, while getting taxed in grain I don't even own." Because despite the romance of pyramids, papyrus scrolls and Cleopatra's glam squad, ancient Egypt was a stressful, sweaty, and occasionally soul-crushing place, especially if you weren't born a priest, a noble, or a cat. Let's say you wake up in 1260 BCE. You're in Thebes, or what's left of it after some desert raiders got frisky. The sun, already up. The temperature, a smooth 102 degrees Fahrenheit. You're lying on a reed mat inside your one-room home made of mud brick and hope. There's chicken on your face. Your brother's leg is draped across your back. Your neighbour is loudly vomiting next door, probably from Nile water he thought was mostly clean. You stretch, and your joints crack like old pottery. You've got 6 hours of labour ahead, and that's if your overseer is in a good mood, and by good, I mean not holding a whip. You shuffle out, step over goat dung, and immediately get smacked in the face by the scent of fish, sweat, and fermented beer. Congratulations, you're a builder for Pharaoh Ramses II, and your shift at the quarry starts now. Food? Don't expect a royal feast. Breakfast is stale barley bread and watery beer served by your aunt, who once tried to hex your father over a goat dispute. You scarf it down and join the labour force, where the main perk of the job is not getting sunstroke before noon. Let's talk workplace safety. Helmets, number sandals, optional, your tools, a dull copper chisel and a bucket. The work: dragging multi-ton limestone blocks using ropes greased with animal fat, and your spine. If you collapse, you might get a bit of shade before someone yells at you to die quieter. And if you're thinking of faking an injury, good luck. Ancient Egyptian doctors were part healer, part guess artist. They believed crocodile dung could treat infections, honey could cure blindness, and headaches were caused by angry spirits. You'd be lucky if they didn't drill a hole in your skull to let the demons out. Now let's say you make it through the day. You trudge home covered in dust, smelling like dead fish and sadness. Your family's waiting, not because they missed you, but because you owe a portion of your barley to a tax collector who arrived mid-afternoon with guards and a scroll longer than your bed. Can't pay? That's okay. Your daughter's pretty. She might make a fine temple offering. Still feeling glamorous. Night falls, and it's dinner time. You feast on lentils, dried onions, and maybe, just maybe, a sliver of dried fish if someone bribed a priest. You eat on the floor. You sit cross-legged with your family who are all arguing about whether Aunt Nefer stole the amulet again. Now you'd think after all that you'd at least get a peaceful night's sleep. Nope. Remember that house of yours? No windows, no airflow, just heat and fleas. And in the next room your cousin's been possessed by a bad dream and is currently yelling at Ra to stop touching his feet. If you were lucky, maybe you'd make it to temple school, where education consisted of memorizing hymns, copying the same 12 lines for 6 years, and getting smacked with reeds if you sneezed. The highest goal? Become a scribe. A scribe had power. A scribe had access. A scribe got to write curses on people's tomb walls and nobody could stop them. But most people, they weren't scribes. They were farmers, tanners, potters, or brickmakers. Professions that screamed short life expectancy. And if you didn't die of infection or dehydration, you still had to worry about crocodiles, sandstorms, conscription, and whatever horrible illness comes from sleeping next to 10 other people and a cow. And relationships. Don't even get me started. Marriages were practical. Divorce was legal but messy. Adultery could get you whipped, shaved, or worse. Affairs, frequent. Privacy, none. And if you were caught cheating with a priest's wife, well, hope you enjoy being mummified early. Just not in the nice linen. The truth is, for every pharaoh covered in gold, there were 100,000 poor souls covered in mud. For every Queen Nefertiti portrait, there were 1,000 women scraping oil off temple floors and muttering about how they deserved better. Sure, ancient Egypt was magnificent. It was beautiful. It gave us medicine, calendars, architecture, and eyeliner. But for the average person, it was hot, harsh, and hilariously unfair. And don't get too excited about dying either, because unless you could afford mummification, which cost more than your house, you were getting dumped in a sandpit, wrapped in your cousin's old bedsheet, with one shabti and a prayer no one would remember. So next time you see pyramids on a postcard, remember the backs that built them, the hands that bled for them, and the millions of feet that trudged across burning stone just to make one man's afterlife a little cozier. But don't get too comfortable yet, because in the next chapter we're diving deeper into the social pyramid. And trust me, it wasn't all gold and divine birthrights at the top. It was jealousy, paranoia, and more political drama than a royal soap opera. Stay cozy, stay curious, and if you're still awake, you're about to find out why being powerful in Egypt might have been the worst curse of all. You'd think being at the top of the social pyramid in ancient Egypt meant your feet never touched the sand. That you'd be reclining on lotus-scented cushions, sipping wine, and being fanned by someone whose only job was royal breeze technician. But nope. Turns out being elite in Egypt came with more curses than comfort. Because while the farmers were dragging limestone blocks in the sun, the upper class was dragging itself through an endless desert of palace drama, backstabbing relatives, and one wrong political move away from being accidentally poisoned during a feast. Let's say you're the son of a noble. Sounds fancy, right? Until you realise your entire life has been laid out before your first tooth. You're not playing in the mud or skipping stones by the Nile. No, you're being force-fed moral lessons by a bald tutor named Mena, reciting spells backwards and learning to paint the gods just right so they don't smite your entire family in the afterlife. As you grow up, your parents aren't teaching you love or kindness. They're teaching you survival by alliance, who to flatter, who to fear, who you can marry without causing a diplomatic incident. By the time you're 14, you've already attended 3 funerals caused by cousin-on-cousin slander wars and 1 banquet where someone definitely got mummified over a seating dispute. Oh, and just because you were rich didn't mean you were safe. In ancient Egypt, power was a ticking time bomb. Your enemies were often in your own house. Your servants could be spies. Your siblings could be trying to bump you down the inheritance list. And if you had any position close to the pharaoh, good luck sleeping. The royal court was like high school meets Game of Thrones. Imagine waking up every day knowing you might get promoted to vizier, or tossed into a crocodile pit for disrespecting divine protocol. 1 wrong sentence, 1 side eye at the wrong priest, and you'd be feeding Sobek before sundown. And that luxury, overrated. Sure, you had silk pillows, golden rings, and oils that smelled like heaven, but you also had constant expectations. You had to pray at the right times, wear the right colours, Never turn your back to the pharaoh, and if you ate something the wrong way, like say chewing your honey-dipped duck leg too loudly at a feast, congratulations. The high priest now thinks you're possessed by a demon, and your family loses a field. Even love was weaponized. Marriages were strategic. You didn't marry for passion. You married to merge land or forge temple alliances. Your bride may be your cousin's daughter from across the Nile, and the first time you meet her is when the priest is already chanting the vows. Meanwhile, the woman you actually love is being offered to the gods because she spilled perfume on the temple steps. And don't forget, the gods were everywhere. Every sneeze, every dream, every strange cloud in the sky, all of it was divine messaging. You'd better make the right offering, or your entire house might be cursed with frogs, boils, or bad harvest vibes. Got a cold? That's Anubis warning you. Got a rash? That's your great-grandmother angry you didn't visit her tomb last week. Now let's say you're not just a noble, you're the royal family, maybe even next in line. Congrats. You've just entered the ancient Egyptian paranoia simulator. You're protected, sure, but you're also trapped. You can't leave the palace without a retinue. You can't sneeze without someone writing it into the royal records. And you definitely can't trust your brothers, one of whom has been accidentally practicing archery in your direction all week. You sleep on gold, but dream of betrayal. You eat like a god, but your food is inspected twice for poison. You wear linen so fine it dissolves in moonlight, but if you forget your ceremonial wig at a festival, you're labelled unclean and shunned for a season. And your job? Endless. If you're royal, you're expected to judge disputes, bless the Nile, speak to the gods, pose for murals, and occasionally ride into battle, all while looking divinely calm and heavily moisturized. Imagine being both a supreme ruler and a full-time influencer with no time off. Even death didn't bring peace. Your burial had to be perfect, or you'd get cursed in the afterlife. You had to be embalmed correctly, wrapped in layers of linen, buried with food, servants, pets, amulets, and just the right Book of the Dead version. Some were abridged, and trust me, that afterlife paperwork was confusing. One wrong glyph on your tomb wall, and instead of paradise, you get stuck in the underworld with a demon shaped like a snake-lion-hippo hybrid gnawing on your soul. So sure, the elite didn't carry bricks, but they carried pressure. Every moment was performance. Every day was a test. You were either being watched by rivals or judged by gods. And if you tripped once, just once, you weren't just out of power. You were out of history. But don't worry, life was even more chaotic below the noble class. Because next we're heading to the dusty, sun-blistered streets of everyday Egypt, where scribes, brewers, and commoners tried to survive on stale bread and half a dream. If you thought being rich in Egypt was hard, wait until you see what it was like to be normal. If you thought the lives of nobles were full of golden cages, the common people of ancient Egypt had their own kind of survival puzzle. And spoiler alert, it didn't come with lotus-scented pillows. The backbone of Egypt was the farmer, the labourer, the potter, and the scribe in training. You probably woke up every day smelling the Nile's pungent mix of fish, mud, and, well, definitely more mud. Your home? A mud brick box with a reed mat for a bed, and about as much privacy as a fish in a barrel. No curtains, no locks, just a family of 6, a couple of chickens, and the neighbour's goat who definitely has a drinking problem. Your mornings were ruled by the sun, rising sharp and unforgiving. You didn't need an alarm clock. The shrieks of the street vendors and the rhythm of temple bells made sure you were up before your first coffee. Oh wait, coffee wasn't invented yet. Instead you guzzled watered-down beer because clean water was rarer than a cool breeze. Your job? Probably planting, harvesting, or maybe crafting pottery. Tasks that felt endless under the blazing sun. farming was back-breaking, sweaty, and brutally dependent on the annual Nile flood. Too much water and your crops drowned. Too little, and famine loomed. And if the gods weren't happy, well, you got to enjoy locusts, droughts, or worst of all, a tax collector with a permanent scowl. Taxes in ancient Egypt were no joke. The government wanted grain, beer, livestock, and sometimes even your children for temple duty. Miss a payment? That meant your property could be seized, your family could be fined, or your name could be cursed by a priest. And believe me, a curse wasn't just bad PR. It was believed to ruin your whole afterlife. Speaking of afterlife, your spiritual life was deeply entangled with your daily grind. You prayed to the gods constantly, hoping for a good harvest, protection from snakes, and no sudden floods washing away your hut. Your offerings weren't elaborate, just a handful of bread, maybe some beer, and a whispered plea as you wiped sweat from your brow. Your diet was humble but practical: barley bread, lentils, onions, and occasional fish if you were near the Nile. Meat was a rare treat reserved for festivals or funerals, which, in an ironic twist, were the social events of the year. Because who doesn't want to party with your neighbours while praying your own death is still a few decades off? Family life was a mixed bag. Marriage was practical and early, usually arranged by parents. Love wasn't the main course, survival was. Kids were expected to contribute by age 7, either by helping with chores or learning a craft. Education was a luxury. If you were a boy, you might get to learn reading and writing, becoming a scribe, which was like winning the ancient Egyptian lottery. Girls, meanwhile, learned household skills, unless they were born into priestly families. Disease was an everyday enemy. Without modern medicine, small wounds could fester into deadly infections. Parasites like lice and worms were as common as the papyrus reeds along the riverbank. And if you got sick, you'd probably visit a healer who mixed herbal remedies with a healthy dose of spiritual incantations. The line between doctor and magician was blurry at best. Privacy? What's that? Life was communal, loud, and messy. Your neighbours knew your business, your arguments, your debts, your love affairs, and were ready to judge you at the temple or marketplace. Gossip was the social currency of the day, and it spread faster than a desert wildfire. But it wasn't all misery. Festivals brought joy, music, dancing, and a break from labour. The annual Apet festival, for example, was a massive celebration with parades, feasts, and priestly rituals that made even the poorest feel part of something bigger. People also bonded over shared stories, legends of gods and heroes who faced trials far worse than muddy feet and sunburn. Still, the constant threat of natural disasters, disease, and political instability meant that hope was as fragile as the papyrus scrolls used to record their history. Your world was a tightrope walk between survival and despair, where each day you prayed not just to live, but to be remembered. So yeah, life as a commoner in ancient Egypt was a sweaty, dusty, unpredictable grind. But it was the pulse of a civilization that shaped history. Coming up next, the hidden lives of women in ancient Egypt, their power, their struggles, and the surprising freedoms they had in a world ruled by men and gods. Stay curious, stay calm, and if you're still awake, get ready to dive into the real stories behind the queens, wives, and daughters of the Nile. When we think of ancient Egypt, towering pyramids and golden pharaohs often steal the spotlight. But behind every grand temple and royal procession, there was a world ruled just as much by women as men. And no, they weren't all sitting quietly weaving baskets or silently obeying orders. Ancient Egyptian women enjoyed a surprising level of respect, independence, and influence that might make you rethink everything you thought about gender roles in antiquity. Let's peel back the layers and take a closer look at what daily life and relationships really looked like for women, queens and commoners alike. First off, marriage in ancient Egypt wasn't just a legal contract. It was a partnership that, surprisingly to some, involved a decent amount of mutual respect. Unlike in many other ancient societies, Egyptian women could own property, inherit land, and manage their own finances. That's right. Your average Egyptian woman might wake up, brew some barley beer, and also quietly check her bank account. Okay, it wasn't a bank as we know it, but deeds, contracts, and property rights were very much on the table. Marriage was generally monogamous, although powerful men might have concubines. For most women, marriage was a practical arrangement, securing family alliances and ensuring economic stability. Yet there was room for love and companionship too. Poetry and love songs from the time paint a picture of couples who shared affection, teasing, and longing. So, yes, the ancient Egyptians knew a thing or two about romance. Speaking of romance, love and attraction were celebrated openly, and often quite humorously. Ancient Egyptian literature is full of flirtatious banter, cheeky metaphors, and playful compliments. Imagine lovers exchanging sweet insults like, "Your eyes shine brighter than the Nile under the moonlight," or joking about how their sweetheart's cooking might just be their downfall. Even pharaohs weren't immune to such romantic antics. One inscription humorously complains that his beloved is as stubborn as a hippopotamus but sweeter than honey. When it came to women's roles, the spectrum was wide. Some women ran households with iron wills, managing servants, finances, and estate affairs. Others worked as weavers, bakers, or midwives. And then there were the priestesses, a prestigious and powerful role that combined religious authority with social influence. Priestesses served goddesses like Isis and Hathor, often running temples, performing sacred rituals and advising nobles. Their spiritual status gave them unique power in a male-dominated world. Queenly power was another story altogether. Women like Hatshepsut, one of Egypt's most famous female pharaohs, didn't just rule. They redefined what it meant to be a leader. Hatshepsut dressed as a man, wore the traditional false beard, and commanded armies and massive building projects. Her reign was a masterclass in blending gender norms with political savvy, and she remains one of the most successful rulers in Egyptian history. But life for women wasn't without its challenges. Patriarchy was real, and social expectations could be strict. A woman's honour was tied to her chastity and behaviour, and infidelity was not taken lightly. Yet the courts could be surprisingly fair. Women had legal rights to divorce and could initiate lawsuits. A woman caught cheating faced punishment, but so did a husband who neglected his duties or abused his wife. Relationships could be complicated, especially in the royal court. Behind the scenes, wives, concubines, and servants manoeuvred for influence, security, and sometimes revenge. Power dynamics were fierce. A queen's favour could make or break careers, and court intrigue was as ruthless as any battle on the desert sands. If you thought medieval queens played dirty, try walking in the sandals of an Egyptian royal consort. Sexuality was integrated into religion and daily life in a way that might surprise modern audiences. Gods like Hathor and Min personified fertility, love, and joy. Festivals celebrated eroticism openly, with music, dancing, and even theatrical performances that highlighted human desire. Sexual health was also treated with herbal remedies and charms, because let's face it, ancient Egyptians knew that life had its pleasures and problems just like us. At the same time, modesty had its place. Social gatherings were segregated by gender, especially among the upper classes. Public displays of affection were limited, though private quarters often saw a very different story. Lovers exchanged gifts, perfumed oils, jewellery and poetry, fueling both passion and social status. Motherhood was another critical aspect of a woman's life. Bearing children, especially sons, was vital for continuing family lines and securing inheritances. Childbirth was risky, and midwives were treasured members of the community. But women also had space to nurture emotional bonds. Letters and poems from the era revealed deep affection between mothers and children, siblings and spouses. What about women who weren't married or widowed? Ancient Egyptian society allowed for a surprising amount of flexibility. Widows could inherit property and remarry. Single women, particularly in urban centres, worked as merchants, midwives or entertainers. Some even owned businesses. So the stereotype of the passive ancient woman doesn't quite hold up here. Still, life was fragile. Disease, famine and war spared no one, and women bore the brunt of many hardships. But their resilience and resourcefulness shine through. Their stories, etched in tomb paintings, inscriptions and papyrus scrolls, tell of women who loved, lost, ruled and survived. So next time you see a statue of an Egyptian queen or a delicate amulet of the goddess Isis, remember the women behind those images were far more complex, powerful and human than most history books let on. Coming up next, the mysterious and sometimes scandalous world of ancient Egyptian dating and romance rituals. Because if you thought Tinder was tricky, wait until you hear about matchmaking, love potions and flirting under the watchful eyes of the gods. Stay tuned, stay relaxed, and let the soft whispers of the Nile guide you deeper into this ancient world. If you think modern dating is complicated, imagine trying to navigate the social maze of ancient Egyptian romance. Forget swipe rights and awkward texts. Here, love was a mix of ritual, superstition, social obligation, and a sprinkle of magic. And believe me, it wasn't always as straightforward as meeting at the local Nile-side cafe and exchanging glances. Romance in ancient Egypt was deeply intertwined with religion, social customs and family expectations. Courtship was often a careful dance between personal desire and societal rules. Most marriages were arranged by parents or matchmakers, designed to strengthen family alliances, secure economic stability, or elevate social standing. Love wasn't usually the starting point. It was more of a bonus if it happened. But make no mistake, romance was very much alive. The Egyptians celebrated love in poetry, songs, and everyday flirtations. Archaeologists have unearthed love letters written on papyrus that reveal a surprisingly modern language of longing, jealousy, and playful teasing. One such letter from a young woman to her lover reads like a text message from the Bronze Age. "If you do not come to me, my heart will break like dry clay." That's poetic desperation and sass wrapped into one. Dating rituals varied depending on social class. For the wealthy, courtship might involve elaborate dinners, gift-giving, and attending festivals where music, dance, and storytelling were the backdrop for romantic intrigue. Jewellery, perfumes, and luxurious oils played a huge role in wooing. Imagine a nobleman sending his beloved a precious amulet or a vial of the rarest frankincense, promising eternal devotion and a hint that she better say yes. But for the common folk it was often simpler, though no less meaningful. Marketplaces, village gatherings and temple festivals were social hubs where young people met, exchanged glances, and perhaps shared a dance or a stolen kiss behind the papyrus reeds. The rhythms of the harp and the beat of the tambourine could spark spontaneous courtships under the scorching Egyptian sun. Flirting was a language all its own. Egyptians used everything from coy glances to witty poetry to express affection, and yes, even in a society obsessed with order and propriety, there was plenty of cheekiness. Imagine a young man joking that his lover's beauty rivaled the golden sun god Ra, only to have her fire back that if that were true, she'd be too hot to handle. Magic played a surprising role in the love lives of Egyptians. Love spells, charms, and amulets were common tools for those looking to attract a partner or secure fidelity. A woman might slip a tiny carved figurine under her lover's pillow, hoping it would inspire passion. A man might wear a protective amulet to ward off rivals. The lines between religion, superstition, and romance blurred, because in ancient Egypt the gods were watching every love note, every secret rendezvous. One of the most fascinating rituals was the marriage contract, a formal agreement between families that outlined the bride's dowry, the husband's responsibilities, and the rights of both parties. Unlike many ancient cultures where women had few legal rights, Egyptian marriage contracts often protected the wife's property and gave her certain freedoms. The idea of marital property was surprisingly advanced, and women could seek divorce if the marriage turned sour. That's right. Ancient Egypt had its own version of "it's not you, it's me." Speaking of divorce, it wasn't scandalous or rare. Either party could initiate it, and reasons range from infertility to incompatibility. Though it might sound progressive, the emotional toll was no joke. Ending a marriage meant navigating complex family politics and social gossip, which could follow you like a shadow through temple festivals and market days. Dating also involved a fair share of jealousy, heartbreak, and intrigue. The royal courts were breeding grounds for romantic rivalries and political scheming. Pharaohs and nobles had harems. Yes, that word originates here. And their favourites wielded influence not just in bedrooms but in the halls of power. One mistress could secure her children's futures, while another plotted to overthrow her rivals with whispered secrets and subtle poison. For everyday Egyptians, love triangles and secret affairs also stirred the pot. Gossip was a popular pastime, and a stolen moment with the wrong person could lead to public scandal or even violent retribution. But the thrill of forbidden love was part of the human experience, even beneath the hot desert sun. Religious festivals added another layer to romance. The festival of Hathor, goddess of love and beauty, was a time for courtship and celebration. People sang, danced, and sometimes paired off in spontaneous unions, believing that the goddess herself blessed their unions. It was the ancient equivalent of a speed dating event, except with a lot more music, dancing, and ritual. Sexuality itself was viewed through a lens that mixed pragmatism, spirituality, and celebration. Egyptian art and mythology openly depict fertility, intimacy, and desire. Sexual health was important, with remedies and potions to address everything from passion to impotence. But sex wasn't just for pleasure. It was essential for continuing family lines and pleasing the gods. At the same time, public modesty was valued. Social norms dictated modest dress and behaviour, especially among the upper classes. Yet behind closed doors, people embraced their desires with the same enthusiasm and complexity as anywhere else in the ancient world. In short, dating and romance in ancient Egypt were a fascinating blend of duty and desire, faith and flirtation, order and chaos. Whether you were a humble farmer or a royal heir, your love life was woven into the fabric of society, politics, and religion. Up next, we'll dive into how ancient Egyptians prepared for sleep, exploring their bedtime rituals, sleeping arrangements, and the spiritual significance they placed on rest. Because if you think after all this flirting you just crash like a modern millennial, think again. After all the intrigue of ancient Egyptian romance and courtship, you might imagine that when night falls along the Nile, everyone just crashes into bed like we do today. But in ancient Egypt, sleep was far more than a simple end to the day. It was a vital ritual wrapped in symbolism, superstition, and very practical habits that reveal a lot about how this remarkable civilization viewed life, death, and everything in between. Let's start with the basics. How did Egyptians actually sleep? The image of soft mattresses, fluffy pillows, and cool bedrooms probably doesn't fit the dusty reality. Most Egyptians, from pharaohs to peasants, slept on wooden beds or woven mats elevated just above the ground. These beds were often low, and the mattresses were stuffed with straw, reeds, or palm fibres, nothing close to memory foam, but enough to keep the dirt out and the bugs at bay. A thick linen sheet or animal hide was sometimes added for warmth during chilly desert nights. For the wealthy, beds were more elaborate, carved from ebony or cedar wood, sometimes adorned with gold leaf or intricate carvings. Pillows were made of wood or stone, shaped to cradle the neck and keep the elaborate hairstyles intact. Yes, you heard that right. Ancient Egyptians took their hair seriously, and sleeping with a stone pillow was part of the beauty ritual to maintain those carefully styled braids and wigs. But here's a fun fact. Wooden or stone pillows might sound uncomfortable to us, but Egyptians believed that such firm supports helped align the body and promote good health. Plus, the hardness kept away creepy crawlies, which were common bedfellows in the ancient world. Sleeping arrangements varied depending on social status and family structure. Pharaohs had private chambers with attendants who ensured their comfort, while common families often shared small rooms with multiple members huddled together for warmth and security. Children might sleep with parents or siblings, and pets, usually cats, were welcome under the covers, adding a purr or two to the nightly symphony. Now, sleep wasn't just about comfort. The Egyptians believed that rest was a sacred pause, a liminal state where the boundary between the living world and the divine thinned. Dreams held enormous importance. They were seen as messages from the gods, visions of the future, or warnings of danger. Because of this, Egyptians practiced dream interpretation with as much seriousness as we treat medical diagnoses today. Special dream interpreters, sometimes priests, would advise individuals on how to respond to their dreams. A bad dream might prompt offerings to specific gods or rituals to ward off evil spirits. And just like we check our phones first thing in the morning, Egyptians recorded dreams on papyrus or in temple inscriptions, proof that a nightmare about a crocodile wasn't just bad luck, it might be a call to action. Bedtime rituals were also heavily infused with religion. Before sleeping, Egyptians might recite prayers or hymns to deities like Hathor, the goddess of love and protection, or Bez, the dwarf god who guarded households from evil spirits, especially during the vulnerable hours of night. Small statues or amulets of these gods were often kept near the bed or under pillows, believed to guard against nightmares and harmful magic. Perfumes and scented oils played their part as well. Egyptians loved fragrances. Frankincense, myrrh, lotus and cinnamon were popular. A light dab of scented oil before bed was not just a luxury, but also thought to purify the body and invite pleasant dreams. These fragrances also kept away insects which, let's be honest, were the real nightmare guests. And speaking of night terrors, Egyptians were no strangers to fears around sleep. the night was considered a time of chaos and danger when malevolent spirits prowled and the sun god Ra's absence made the world vulnerable. That's why homes were often decorated with protective symbols, ankhs, the eye of Horus, and scarabs, carefully placed near sleeping areas to ward off evil and ensure a peaceful rest. Interestingly, the concept of the ka, a person's vital spirit or life force, was closely connected to sleep. Egyptians believed that the ka left the body during sleep to wander the spiritual realm and return refreshed by morning. That's partly why sudden death in sleep was often seen as a sign that the ka failed to return properly, linking sleep with life and death in a profound way. But what about naps and sleep schedules? Unlike our rigid 9 to 5, Egyptians worked with the natural rhythms of the sun and Nile. The hottest hours of the day were spent resting or taking siestas to avoid heat exhaustion, while nights were longer and filled with various activities, prayers, storytelling, music, and yes, sometimes even romance or political plotting in the shadowy corridors of the palace. Their calendar also revolved around the lunar cycle and agricultural seasons, which influenced sleep patterns. Festivals often went late into the night, with feasts and dancing followed by days of rest or reduced labour. Sleep wasn't a passive state. It was woven tightly into the social and religious fabric of Egyptian life. One of the most fascinating archaeological finds is the sleeping mummy, perfectly preserved bodies lying as if at rest, often with small amulets placed over the heart or under the tongue, meant to protect the sleeper in the afterlife. This shows just how deeply Egyptians link the quality of sleep with spiritual well-being, extending beyond this life into eternity. Even children had their own bedtime customs. Toys, dolls, and small amulets were kept nearby for comfort and protection. Families would tell stories, often mythological, to lull little ones to sleep, weaving lessons of morality and courage into bedtime tales. It was an early form of education and emotional support, a timeless ritual that transcends millennia. Now here's a fun thought. If you ever imagined ancient Egyptian nights as silent and still, think again. Cities like Thebes and Memphis hummed with nocturnal activity. Guards patrolled, musicians played, and craftsmen worked late into the evening. Sleep was precious but sometimes elusive, especially for those who had to keep the kingdom running or watch for enemies in the dark. So, while we often picture Egyptian pyramids as monuments to death, remember that life, rest, and sleep were just as monumental to the people who built them. They honoured sleep not just as physical necessity, but as a sacred bridge to the divine, a time when the soul danced in the shadowy realm of dreams, and the gods whispered secrets under starlit skies. Coming up next, we'll explore the social consequences of sleep and dreams in Egyptian society, from how rulers used sleep to their advantage to how dreams shaped politics, religion, and daily life. Because in ancient Egypt, sleep wasn't just personal, it was power. As we continue our journey into the mysterious world of ancient Egyptian sleep, it's time to uncover how rest and dreams weren't just private moments. They were powerful social tools that shaped politics, religion, and even the fate of entire kingdoms. In modern times, we might shrug off a strange dream as just the brain's random nonsense or maybe a leftover snack upsetting our stomach. But in ancient Egypt, dreams were a direct line to the divine. They were seen as messages, warnings, or prophecies sent by gods, ancestors, or spirits. Ignoring a significant dream could mean ignoring your destiny. Pharaohs, priests, and nobles often turned to dream interpreters, a respected class of specialists who read the symbols and signs that appeared during sleep. These dream interpreters weren't just guessing. they relied on an extensive tradition of dream manuals, much like ancient how-to guides, which catalogued common symbols and their meanings. For instance, dreaming of crocodiles could signal an enemy lurking nearby, while the sudden appearance of a lotus flower might mean renewal or hope. But here's where things get politically juicy. Imagine you're the pharaoh, the divine ruler on earth, responsible for everything from flood management to military conquests. Now imagine that one night you dream that your throne is sinking into the Nile or that your enemies surround your palace. You wouldn't just ignore that nightmare and hope it passes. No, you'd gather your trusted advisors, consult the high priests and probably adjust your plans. Maybe send spies, tighten security or launch a preemptive strike. Dreams weren't just personal, they were state business. Even more fascinating, some pharaohs used dreams deliberately as political tools. They might fabricate or exaggerate dreams to legitimize decisions, justify wars, or suppress rebellions. The line between true divine vision and political theatre was sometimes blurred. A well-timed dream could unite a fractious kingdom or rally troops, inspiring confidence by suggesting that the gods were firmly on their side. Priests also held considerable power because they controlled access to these sacred dreams. Temples often had dream incubation chambers, quiet, candlelit rooms where devotees slept in hopes of receiving divine guidance. Waking with a vision could lead to profound social influence. A priest who claimed to interpret a prophecy about an upcoming famine or victory could sway the actions of the pharaoh and the populace. But dreams weren't always reassuring. Nightmares, considered the work of malevolent spirits or demons, were feared as harbingers of doom. The Egyptian god Bes, the protector of households and childbirth, was often invoked to shield sleepers from these nocturnal terrors. Amulets bearing his likeness were tucked beneath pillows, promising safe passage through the shadowy world of sleep. Now, let's talk about sleep's role in social hierarchy. While pharaohs and nobles enjoyed private, comfortable sleeping quarters, with attendants on hand to serve them at a moment's notice, the common folk had a very different experience. Sleep was often disrupted by the demands of daily labour, communal living, and the constant noise of bustling towns. However, even for peasants, dreams could carry weight. It wasn't unusual for a farmer to consult a local priest or dream interpreter before planting crops or making important decisions. The belief that dreams could influence real-world outcomes was deeply ingrained across social classes, uniting society in a shared understanding of sleep's significance. Sleep deprivation, intentional or not, could be a political weapon. Rulers or nobles might deprive rivals of rest through nighttime raids, noisy celebrations, or even by sending spies to watch their enemies' movements. A weary adversary is a weaker adversary, and in a world where power balanced on a knife's edge, this tactic was not uncommon. Moreover, ancient Egyptian funerary texts reveal an intriguing connection between sleep, death, and rebirth. The Book of the Dead, a guide for the deceased navigating the afterlife, often used sleep metaphors to describe death as a long rest before resurrection. This reinforced the idea that sleep was a sacred state, bridging earthly life and eternal existence. For the living, this belief meant that sleep was not simply physical rest, but a daily rehearsal for death and rebirth, a chance to rejuvenate both body and soul. It's no wonder Egyptians took great care to ensure good sleep hygiene, from protective amulets to ritualistic prayers, all designed to keep the car safe during the night. And here's a wild fact. Some pharaohs reportedly claimed to receive divine revelations during sleep that instructed monumental building projects, religious reforms, or military campaigns. These dream commissions were often depicted in temple reliefs, glorifying the ruler's divine connection and reinforcing their authority. Even art and literature reflect the importance of dreams and sleep. Poems and stories frequently describe lovers reunited in dreams, or heroes receiving guidance from gods during slumber. The famous Dream Stele of Thutmose IV, for example, recounts how the young prince dreamed that the Sphinx promised him kingship if he cleared away the sand that had buried it. That dream wasn't just a story. It was a political manifesto etched in stone. Sleep and dreams were also linked to healing and magic. People believed that certain herbs, incense and chants could improve sleep quality or induce prophetic dreams. Temples offered healing rituals involving sleep, where patients rested in sacred rooms hoping for divine cures in their dreams. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect is how deeply embedded sleep was in the social fabric. Whether you were a humble fisherman, a temple priest, or the pharaoh himself, your sleep and dreams influenced your reputation, decisions, and survival. Sleep wasn't a mere pause in the day, it was a battlefield of spiritual warfare, a stage for divine communication, and a tool of political power. Coming up next, we'll explore the strange, sometimes dangerous rituals Egyptians practiced around death and sleep, and how the line between the two blurred in both belief and practice. Because in ancient Egypt, the night was full of mystery, and you'd better be prepared if you wanted to wake up tomorrow. As we move deeper into the world of ancient Egyptian sleep, things start to get a little eerie. Because in Egypt, sleep and death were two sides of the same cosmic coin, so closely intertwined that it's sometimes hard to tell where one ended and the other began. To the ancient Egyptians, death wasn't a full stop. It was more like a long, deep sleep from which the soul might one day awaken. This wasn't just poetic. It shaped everything from their funerary customs to how they prepared for the night's rest. Consider the elaborate mummification process, an extreme act of preservation designed to ensure the body was ready for its eternal slumber. The embalmed corpse was treated like the ultimate sleeper, carefully wrapped in layers of linen, tucked away in a coffin fit for a king, and laid to rest in a tomb meant to protect it from harm. This was not just to keep decay at bay, but to create a bed for the soul's journey. But the bed of death wasn't the only one treated with reverence. The Egyptians also had special deathbeds in temples and homes, spaces prepared for the dying or those in a trance-like state, believed to be moments when the soul was at its most vulnerable. These beds were often decorated with symbols of protection, eyes, scarabs, and ankhs, to guard against malevolent spirits seeking to snatch the soul before its time. The boundary between sleep and death was so thin that in some rituals, priests would mimic sleep as part of ceremonies. These death-sleep rituals included chanting, incense, and offerings designed to help the deceased soul rest peacefully and navigate the dangerous afterlife. The idea was that just as the body rested by day and awoke by night, the soul must successfully pass through the night of death to reach rebirth. And here's a wild fact that might make you double-check your own bedtime routine. Some pharaohs reportedly had their tombs designed with sleep chambers, symbolic rooms meant to replicate the bedroom, complete with furniture and personal items so their souls could sleep comfortably in the afterlife. Imagine having a bedroom that you might never actually wake up from. This blending of sleep and death also fed into their beliefs about dreams. It was thought that the deceased could send messages back to the living in dreams, offering guidance, warnings, or blessings. So, when a loved one appeared in a dream, it wasn't just a trick of the mind, it was a sacred visit from the beyond. Dream temples even developed to facilitate communication between worlds, where the living would sleep in hopes of receiving messages from ancestors or gods. But the line between protection and danger was razor thin. Spirits of the dead were revered, but would also be vengeful if not properly honoured. This is where magic and ritual took centre stage. Families would perform nightly prayers, burn incense, and use amulets to keep restless spirits at bay during sleep. These practices weren't just superstition, they were vital safeguards for mental and physical health, especially in a world where death was ever present. Sleep itself was sometimes weaponized in myths and stories. The god Set, often cast as the villain, was associated with chaos and disruption, including nightmares and sleeplessness. To suffer from restless nights could be a sign of his curse, requiring rituals of purification and protection. And just like in many ancient cultures, dreams were a source of prophecy and divine knowledge, but also potential danger. A bad dream could predict death or disaster, and people took elaborate steps to avoid these outcomes, from wearing protective charms to consulting priests who specialized in nightmare removal. The Egyptians even had a concept that during sleep, the bayar, part of the soul representing personality, temporarily left the body to wander. Ensuring the bayar returned safely was a major concern, which explains the careful placement of grave goods, prayers and spells designed to anchor the soul to its body. All of this paints a picture of a culture where the sacred and the mundane, life and death, sleep and wakefulness, were woven into a continuous cycle. Your nightly rest wasn't just about physical recovery. It was a moment of spiritual significance and potential danger. For everyday Egyptians, these beliefs influenced daily routines. Houses were built with protective symbols near sleeping areas, beds were placed carefully to avoid evil spirits' paths, and families gathered for prayers before nightfall. No one took sleep lightly, because it was the gateway to both dreams and the afterlife. In royal circles, these beliefs reached even greater heights. Pharaohs were often buried with elaborate sleeping chambers, filled with treasures, food, and magical items. Their tombs were designed as eternal bedrooms, reflecting the idea that they would slumber until the gods called them to rise again and rule once more. And as you drift off tonight, imagine the vast ancient Egyptian nightscape. The stars blazing over the Nile, priests chanting in dark temples, common folk lighting small fires and whispering prayers to Bes, and somewhere deep within a pyramid, a pharaoh's deathbed waiting for its eternal occupant. Up next, we'll delve into the fascinating daily life of ancient Egyptians and how their work, social interactions, and even dating rituals shaped their sleep habits. Because surviving and thriving in ancient Egypt wasn't just about what happened during the day, it was deeply influenced by how and when people slept. The sun had barely crested over the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of gold and crimson, when the city of Thebes began to stir. In ancient Egypt, the rhythm of life was tightly wound to the rising and setting of that ever-important star, the sun god Ra. For most Egyptians, the day's work was the most important thing, and if you think that meant lazy mornings and leisurely breakfasts, think again. The ancient Egyptian workday was brutal and it started early. Farmers, artisans, scribes and labourers awoke before dawn, often to the sounds of livestock, the Nile's gentle currents, and neighbours preparing for the day. The sheer intensity of manual labour, especially during the flood season when fields had to be cleared and crops planted, meant that sleep was a precious commodity. For many, there was simply no room for long or restful nights. Yet, despite the grueling schedules, Egyptians had an intimate relationship with rest and recovery. After all, how else could they sustain the productivity needed to build the pyramids, paint stunning tombs, and keep the empire thriving. What's fascinating is that their sleep wasn't confined to just nighttime. Historical records and archaeological evidence suggest they practiced what modern science would call polyphasic sleep. Multiple rest periods throughout the 24-hour cycle. Siestas were common. As the harsh Egyptian sun climbed high, many workers took breaks, retreating to the shade for a quick nap. This midday rest wasn't just practical, it was essential. The desert heat could sap even the strongest, and a brief period of sleep helped recharge bodies and minds. In a way, the ancient Egyptians understood circadian rhythms long before modern science put a name to it. But while daytime naps were widespread among common folk, the elite followed a different pattern. Nobles and priests often enjoyed longer, uninterrupted sleep in cooler, more comfortable quarters. Their beds were intricately carved, padded with fine linens and sometimes even scented with essential oils like myrrh and frankincense, believed to aid restful sleep and spiritual purification. Speaking of beds, the design and placement were more than just about comfort. They had spiritual significance too. Egyptians often positioned beds to face certain directions or near protective amulets, aiming to align sleep with cosmic forces. For the pious, sleep was a chance to connect with gods, receive divine messages, or even prepare for the next life. But what about the social aspects of daily life and sleep? Family units in Egypt were typically close-knit. Even in bustling cities, homes were shared spaces where parents, children, and sometimes extended family members lived in close quarters. Beds were often communal, and it wasn't unusual for multiple family members to share a sleeping area, which might make modern notions of privacy seem laughable. Sleep, then, was both a private rest and a social affair. This communal sleeping reinforced bonds, but it also meant that any household disputes or worries could easily disrupt rest. Imagine trying to catch some Z's while your younger sibling practiced their flute, or your parents argued about the harvest. Romantic relationships and courtship rituals also intersected with daily life and sleep patterns. Ancient Egyptian love poetry reveals a culture where lovers treasured the night as a sacred time. The privacy of the bedroom was a rare space for intimacy in a society that balanced strict social hierarchies with surprisingly open expressions of affection. For example, it was common for couples to exchange love poems and gifts, flowers, perfumes, or jewellery, hoping to woo each other in the glow of the oil lamp's flicker. Bedroom walls sometimes bore inscriptions of love and longing, making sleep spaces not just for rest but for emotional connection. However, the strict societal roles still applied. Marriages were often arranged for political or economic reasons, but romance wasn't entirely absent. The nightly rituals, prayers to gods like Hathor, the goddess of love and beauty, and Bez, protector of households, highlighted how intertwined love, protection and sleep really were. For the working classes, romantic life was more pragmatic. Sleeping arrangements could be simple, even cramped, but moments stolen in the dark were cherished. Festivals, market days, and temple ceremonies provided rare chances to socialize, flirt, and perhaps find a mate. But with so much physical labor and responsibility, exhaustion was a constant opponent. And here's a fascinating tidbit. Archaeologists have found evidence that some workers involved in pyramid construction were given extra rations and rest days. The logic? Well-fed and well-rested workers were less likely to injure themselves or revolt. It's the ancient Egyptian version of work smarter, not harder, which likely contributed to their monumental achievements. Despite all this, nighttime in ancient Egypt wasn't always peaceful. The streets could be noisy with celebrations, religious ceremonies, and occasional conflicts. Without modern insulation or blackout curtains, the sounds and lights of nightly life often seeped into sleeping quarters. So, sleep was something to be managed carefully, protected through ritual, architecture and community effort. As day turned to dusk and the Nile's gentle waters reflected the setting sun, Egyptians prepared for the nightly transition. Lamps were lit, incense burned, and prayers whispered to ward off evil spirits that prowled in the darkness. The boundary between the waking world and the realm of dreams grew thin, reminding everyone that sleep was both a blessing and a responsibility. Next, we will explore the unique Egyptian beliefs about death, the afterlife, and how those views shaped even the most intimate moments of life, including relationships and family. Because in Egypt, even love and loss were seen through the lens of eternity, and that influenced everything from the bedroom to the burial chamber. By now, you've walked through ancient Egyptian marketplaces, slipped past temple walls, and even tiptoed through the intimate corners of love, labour, and dreams. But before we draw the curtains on this journey, there's one final piece of the story that threads it all together. One last mosaic tile in the vast mural of ancient Egyptian life, legacy. Because in ancient Egypt, what mattered just as much as how you lived was how you were remembered. Legacy wasn't a vague concept reserved for pharaohs and poets. It was tangible, it had weight, it was chiselled into stone, painted onto tomb walls, wrapped in linen, whispered in prayers, and passed through generations. And everything, from how you worked, who you loved, how you slept, to how you died, shaped the story people told about you once you were gone. Every Egyptian, regardless of class, hoped to be remembered well. For the wealthy, that might mean commissioning elaborate tombs filled with carved hieroglyphs of family feasts and peaceful afterlives. For the poor, it could mean a single charm buried with them, or a child saying their name in a morning prayer. Why? Because in Egyptian belief to be forgotten was a second death. This idea shaped the end-of-life rituals with heartbreaking care. Death was not an end, but a transition, a crossing from this world to the field of reeds, a kind of heavenly mirror of Egypt where the Nile always flowed just right, the crops never failed, and everyone finally had time to rest. But reaching that paradise wasn't guaranteed. The soul had to pass a test, literally. You'd stand before Osiris, god of the dead, and your heart would be weighed against the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth and balance. If your heart was lighter than the feather, you could enter the afterlife. If heavier, well, you'd be devoured by a monstrous creature called Amit, a terrifying mix of crocodile, lion and hippo. No reincarnation, no second chances, just eternal oblivion. That's why Egyptians obsessed over right living, why they mummified their dead with sacred precision, why they carved stories into stone, why they prayed before bed. Because everything, every word, every night's sleep, every act of kindness tipped the scale one way or another. And in that pursuit of legacy, sleep once again took centre stage. Tombs were designed to be eternal beds. Sarcophagi were decorated like beds with headrests, footboards, and protective symbols on every side. Even the gods were often depicted resting or sleeping when not actively guiding the cosmos. The afterlife wasn't imagined as endless activity, but as eternal peace, not the chaotic, fire-filled hell of later traditions, but a quiet, fertile eternity. It was a bedtime story you spent your whole life preparing for. This idea permeated the home too. Families were expected to honour their ancestors regularly, not just with offerings and prayers, but by living in a way that honoured their memory. Children slept under the watchful eyes of their elders' portraits or shrines. Names were passed down like sacred heirlooms. Even lullabies sometimes invoke the names of ancestors, asking them to protect the sleeping child from bad dreams or illness. Sleep, again, was a portal. 1 foot in this world, 1 in the next. And so, while ancient Egyptian life was full of hardship, backbreaking labour, rigid hierarchies, dry heat, and sharp politics, the promise of eternal rest was a powerful balm. The idea that if you did it right, if you honoured the gods, cherished your family, and lived with balance, you could sleep forever beneath the stars, surrounded by all the things and people you loved. Of course, not everyone got there. Some were forgotten, some erased, some buried without rites or left in unmarked graves. But even then, folk belief offered hope that a kind stranger might one day speak your name, restore your memory, and tip the scales back toward lightness. And that brings us here to this quiet moment, because in some strange roundabout way, we're continuing that tradition. We're speaking the names, telling the stories, remembering what it meant to be alive, and yes, to rest, thousands of years ago. We're the echoes they hoped someone someday might still hear. So if you've stayed awake this long, through the candlelit halls and papyrus streets, through dreams and rituals and final farewells, then you've done what even the priests and pharaohs hoped for. You've remembered, and if you enjoyed this journey, feel free to like the video and subscribe. It helps keep these stories alive and floating down the Nile of time. Let me know in the comments what you'd like to explore next. From forgotten empires to haunted castles, there's always another strange chapter to unfold. But for now, let the sounds carry you. Let your breath slow. Let your body sink deeper into stillness, like an ancient soul laying down in the soft sands of eternity. There's nothing left to do, no tombs to build, no scrolls to write. Just sleep.